So I've been teaching. I've been teaching for about 30 years, and I can always tell when students are engaged in the topic, and I can always tell when they're not. And when they're not engaged in the topic, my students look very sullen, injured, bored, despondent. They often look like they're hostages taken away by Colombian narco terrorists, and they're sitting in the basement of an abandoned warehouse waiting for their parents to send in ransom money. But yesterday, I was teaching a topic of grading. You know, is grading a way to champion high quality education? And this topic was elicited by an essay that we had to read for the day. It was called From Degrading, spelled in one word, to Degrading, DE-grading, by Alfie Kohn. And he's brought up a topic that in 30 years I don't think has ever created so much enthusiasm, controversy, emotion for my students. In fact, it was a 2-hour class, and we were supposed to cover 2 essays, one by Kohn and one by Jonathan Kozol, another essay about education, about how a lot of inner schools train students to just be burger flippers. They don't even give them aspirations to go up the socioeconomic tier. But you know, we didn't even get to that essay because the class was so absorbed by Alfie Kohn's essay. And I want to let you know, while I believe Alfie Kohn's essay is a very a good topic, a compelling topic, and while I'll even say that Alfie Kohn has compelling reasons to be against grading, I don't care for his writing style. I don't care for his argumentation. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I see a lot of evidence in Alfie Kohn of a writer who engages in demagoguery, a cheap bag of tricks of emotionalism to get his argument across. And I do find him to be someone whose writing is very, not only does it lack persuasiveness, but it's morally repugnant. I'll give you 2 examples. He creates this either-or fallacy. Either you agree with him and as a teacher and you want to de-emphasize grading or eliminate it altogether and thereby prove that you are someone who is conscientious, who is an effective teacher, who cares about the students and who cares about education. Or if you do rely on grading, if you reject his thesis and you want to continue to use grades, that's evidence that you're a bad teacher, that you'd rather just control the students and you would rather kill their love of education. And because of his lack of nuance and his either-or fallacy, I find that morally repugnant and a very ineffective way to argue. Another problem I have with Alfie Kohn is that he uses hyperbole. And let's be clear, I love hyperbole. I just compared my students when they're bored to hostages in the basement of a warehouse waiting for ransom money. So I would be the first to love hyperbole. But that's when it's used for humor or irony or something like that. But he uses it for cheap emotionalism. He argues that grading is synonymous with toxic pollution, that grading has been this toxic cloud of pollution in education. And I find that type of hyperbole in that context to be evidence of a demagogue. I'm sorry. I have other problems with Alfie Kohn as well. He's against homework. And I think my problem with Alfie Kohn is he's a particular type of do-gooder who doesn't understand that his good intentions create what I call the discrimination of low expectations. For him, lowering expectations is a way to create an even playing field. And I find that type of do-goodism and utopianism to be really naive about human nature and to be disconnected from reality. And it's part of his demagogic worldview and his argumentation. So I'm not drinking the Alfie Kohn Kool-Aid. However, I think there are really compelling arguments to be against grading. Just he didn't make the case. I'm sorry. He didn't make the case. And I want to give my students did a better job of coming up with reasons why getting rid of grades. They came up with better reasons than he did, and I want to go over some of those reasons. But then I do want to go over some reasons why I want to defend grading. Uh, I'm going to try to be nuanced here. I'm not going to engage in demagoguery or either or fallacy. Clearly, grading is imperfect, but I think I want to go in the direction of defending grading, as I'll tell you. But let me give you some reasons why some of my students are against grading, and they gave some really good ones. Too often, my students have seen teachers use grading as an abuse of power. They would have a personal like of one student and give that student a certain leniency, and then for some reason a personal vendetta against another student, and they would be very harsh with that student, and that's clearly corrupt and arbitrary and an abuse of power. And clearly, when grading is misused like that, it's going to make you turned off to grading. Though I would argue that just because nincompoops are misapplying a system doesn't make the system bad. It makes the nincompoop bad. That would be my counter argument, I suppose. Now, this next one's very interesting. And I believe both my students and Alfie Kohn would argue this point, that too much emphasis on grading kills your love of education. And there's clearly a lot of truth in that. I have international students, and I don't have as many as I used to have. I made a personal commitment to my boss to be very consistent and accurate to the grading rubric a year and a half ago. And because we have to adhere to what's called student learning outcomes, we have to make sure that students, when they get out of my class and they go to another class or they go to Cal State or USC, they have to. It's assumed by other instructors that they've achieved certain benchmarks or student learning outcomes, and if they don't achieve those outcomes, I'm not allowed to pass them. So grading is kind of it's very concrete, very black and white in a certain way, and a lot of international students, they're looking for more leniency because there is a real pressure in my international students to get a 4.0. And they come from another country, and they're really on a mission to go to USC or UCLA or Berkeley or something like that. And my God, they hate education. They'll even tell me. They'll even just tell me this is not about. This is a purely mercenary business situation, and as we live in this new economy with new challenges, with machines taking over white-collar jobs and with merchandising jobs and other jobs being outsourced to other countries, and with the economy having new challenges and with college costing so much money, unfortunately, one of the results of that is an overemphasis on your grade because so much counts on it. It's almost perceived by many students as a life or death situation. And clearly, if you're a student, common sense tells you have to consider your grade. But also common sense should tell you that you need to love education for its own sake. You want to become a critical thinker and not just be another mindless consumer in the society, and you want to love education to help evolve into a critical thinker. There's got to be a balance there. And I can understand how too much emphasis on grading can indeed can compromise your love of education. So I will concede that point to a certain degree. Some of my students made some great observations. When they were in high school, some of my students told me they were, they had friends or classmates who belonged to certain accelerated programs. It could have been an AVID or some kind of AP track. And they said these students were huge butt kissers, sycophants, conformists. I heard the word sheep being used to describe how their eagerness to conform to the system and get to the top of the power hierarchy had made them sycophants, toadies, fanboys, group-thinking sheep for whatever kind of program they were on. And I think I could concede that too much of an emphasis on grades isn't so much about becoming a critical thinker, but becoming a hoop jumper, a conformist, a sycophant. And excellent argument. I love that argument, and I'm grateful that my students made that observation. Again, I'm going to tell you, my students had more compelling reasons to go against grading than Alfie Kohn's essay. His essay really annoyed me for the reasons I mentioned. I should just get off that. I should continue focusing on this. What else do my students dislike? One of my students, she said something very interesting, and I do have to concede to this as well, that when there's too much emphasis on grading, we're trying, probably feebly, to quantify intelligence. We're trying to reduce intelligence to some metric, some number, and that's very naive. It's very oversimplistic, and that's connected to another reason to be against grading. Another one of my students said that there are brilliant students who are socially maladapted, so they don't do well in classroom environments, and education does not really measure their potential and their performance, and I'll concede that as well. And so those are really compelling points. There's one other huge compelling point, and my students told me this is why it really pressed their buttons, and this point is so important. It goes beyond grading. It's about fairness. It's about equality. It's about justice. And what this last point is, and it's a very compelling point against grading, is that students who come from rich or higher tier economic school districts come to my class, my English classes, with higher grammar, higher linguistic aptitude. And so there's a certain class socioeconomic bias that reinforces the power structure, the haves and the have-nots. I mean, the tests show that if you come from a lower income school district, you're going to go to college and you're going to be less prepared. You're going to have more grammar problems. You're going to be less likely to meet the student learning outcomes. And grading simply is reinforcing the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And that's something we have to look at. My counter argument would be, gosh, man, there's nothing I can really do in a 16-week semester to remedy a disparity of education that's taken decades. You know, students have gone to school for a long time before they got to my class. We're talking, what, 12 years? Something like that? 12, 13 years? And it's hard for me teaching freshman composition or even the critical thinking class to get people caught up in 16 weeks. If we're going to address grades, we got to start a lot earlier, and our country doesn't seem particularly committed to addressing this problem. Maybe it will. I don't know. And so my students really made me think hard about grading, and yet I would have to concede a lot of their points. There's a lot about it that's imperfect for the reasons I discussed, but I do want to defend it. I think if I were writing an essay on this, I would probably concede that my opponent has many good points. My students do. I'm not fond of Alfie Kohn's argumentation. Find it morally repugnant, and a lot of people do. I think he's a pretty galvanizing figure from what I've read. He has his detractors, and clearly I've been pretty vocal here in my criticism of Alfie Kohn. Thank you, Alfie Kohn, for raising this important subject, though. I got to give you credit for that, because you've done a lot to further this conversation about an important matter that's not really just about grading, but it's about social equality, honestly, and I applaud you for that. And forgive me if I was a little harsh on you, but I try to do my best to be direct and not candy coat things. But anyways, let's look at some defenses of grading. As far as the even playing field, as I said earlier, even if you were to take away my ability to grade, would I really be able to remedy 12 years of an uneven playing field in a 16-week semester? I don't think so. The other thing is I think the argument against grading is naive about human nature. We tend to do better when there's a carrot and a stick. If my daughters want to use the iPad for 20 minutes and I look in their rooms and it looks like a tornado hit their rooms, I can't let them have the iPad except as a carrot. I say, you need to clean your rooms. And my God, those rooms are clean with great efficiency and great speed. If I just tell them to clean the rooms and there's no reward, it's a lackadaisical affair. I already see this with my children. There are other things that I notice about my children. If they're not eating their dinner, if they're goofing around at the dinner table, and this annoys me because when I eat, I'm all business. When they're goofing around and I need to do the dishes and it's been 45 minutes have passed and their chicken and their broccoli's been untouched, I have to resort to a carrot and a stick. I'll open the refrigerator, I'll pull out the carrot cake. This is a delicious carrot cake, girls. And it's not going to be for you. It's going to be all eaten by me. It's mine, unless you eat your dinner. And my God, 3 minutes later, their plates are clean, and they've joined the Clean Plate Club. God bless you, girls, the carrot and the stick. Now, this is an interesting notion because I would say that if we live in a society where there's no grades and there's no carrot and stick, this actually kind of talks about a socialist utopianism on a broader level. If we're all promised a Tesla, my favorite car, and a delicious Swiss luxury watch, which I'm not wearing, where's the motivation? I mean, why would you go to med school for 15 years if you could have the same lifestyle working at Haagen-Dazs ice cream and getting free banana splits for the rest of your life? Now, I think that argument's a bit of an oversimplification, but there is something to be said about how we need a certain amount of competition. We are very Darwinian inside of us. I don't think we should unleash the Darwinian beast without restrictions, because then we would become what I would call the predatory devil. You don't want to live in a society where you just unleash the competitive Darwinian gene with any restrictions. Then we all become predatory devils with no empathy. But on the other hand, we don't want to go in the other extreme where you just create pure entitlement and we expect with no performance. Then we become the lazy devil, and we live in a society that suffers from stagnation, a complete absence of innovation and creativity. And that's bad too. We have to find a golden mean. And I think really this grading debate does point to that type of conversation about finding a golden mean in society. One that I would like, that requires a lot of critical thinking. I don't see a lot of critical thinkers in politics and elsewhere who want to have a nuanced conversation about this. I'm depressed. I think I'll go have a slice of carrot cake. Wait, I'm not done. Another point of defense of grading, and I've talked about this with my students. Students want to feel distinctive. They don't want to be they don't want to be another number like every other student. They don't want just to pass or fail or just be lumped. A lot of my students say, I take education very personally. I take it very seriously. And what I do is an expression of me. And I feel that grading me is a way of giving me a distinction that I wouldn't get if we were all lumped in the same big category. And some of my students take that very personally. I find that an interesting argument. What I would also say is that I need grades to motivate students to do the reading. You know, I have a lot of my students right now, and this is probably my biggest challenge. It's not just my challenge. I've talked to other English instructors in my department. They all agree the most difficult challenge is to get students to read what you've assigned on the syllabus. And I will tell you, when you have a class to teach and 0 or 1 or 2 students have read the assignment on the syllabus, it just sucks the air out of the room. And you tell me, if I get rid of grades, how many people are going to read? It's going to be even worse. No one's going to do the reading. And sometimes you need to be forced to acquaint yourself with something in order to respect it and to have interest in it. I had 0 interest in Shakespeare, but when I studied English and I had a gun to my head, and I had to study it. You know, I had to actually buy record albums and have the headphones on and listen to actors do performances of Shakespeare while I read the text. And then I realized this guy is some kind of a super genius from outer space. And I would have never had that understanding or appreciation for his genius except that I was forced to do the reading. Now, I mean, you can quiz students every day to try to get them to read. And I know some instructors who do that. And that's tough, man. That's a lot of grading, I will tell you. That's a lot of bureaucratic paperwork. But good luck with that. My other argument to keep grades is that I call this the discrimination of low expectations. By eliminating grading, we're telling the students that grading is too punitive and it's making expectations higher than we want. And there is an implicit patronizing, sort of condescending relationship between the do-gooder teacher, and we're not going to hurt the feelings of the student. And I'm not comfortable with that at all. And back to another argument is just because there are nincompoop teachers who abuse grading, who are arbitrary with grading, it doesn't mean that grading itself is so flawed. Why am I thinking of that gun argument? Guns don't kill people, people kill people. Grades don't hurt kids, teachers hurt. I don't know what I'm talking about. But my last point is that I've been teaching for 30 years, and for those of you who don't think grades matter, I will tell you that 95% or more of the time, a student who receives an A really does distinguish herself above the other students. She really does. One thing I've noticed about A students is they share a lot of common characteristics. Number one, they have a huge work ethic. Number two, they have no BS. They don't give you BS stuff at all. They're all integrity and they're all authenticity. Another thing I'll tell you is that an A student is very tenacious. If she doesn't understand something on the syllabus or your writing assignment, they're right on that, man. They're asking you about it. They don't wait until the last second and go, oh, I didn't understand. It was confusing. There was a certain ambiguity that crippled my ability to get... No, they never do that. They're very tenacious. The other thing I've noticed about A students, punctual. They don't mess around, man. There's no stories about why a paper's late. I have some students, they're always late with their papers, and the stories to explain why the papers are late are long, man. They're longer than the essay. They're putting more time into constructing a long excuse than words allotted to the essay. I'm telling you right now. The other thing I noticed about A students, perfect attendance. That's huge. I notice it all the time. It's like perfect attendance. There's an implicit message, respect, and it always works. The other thing I noticed about A students, they balance their desire to get a high grade with their love of knowledge. They're not pure mercenaries. You can't do it. It doesn't work that way. You'll just be miserable and you'll burn out and you'll hate your life. You got to find a balance between aspiring to get a strong grade and to love education. There's another distinguishing characteristic of A student. They do the reading. You know what annoyed me? The student came to my office a week ago, and he's all helpless and sad and just, I don't understand the assignment. And I looked at him, I go, did you do the reading? And he paused, and I go, you didn't do the reading. And he shook his head. And he continued to tell me he didn't understand the assignment. I felt like saying, get out of my office. You don't get to complain to me that you don't get to understand the assignment because you didn't do the reading. But he stayed there. He persisted on being the victim. I was very annoyed. I was very chafed. I was very bellicose. But, you know, I just kept saying, you got to do the reading. He kept going, I don't understand the assignment. It went back and forth. Do the reading. Go home and do the reading. Always do the reading. Another quality I notice about A students is they sit upright in class and they're attentive. The oxygen from their diaphragm gets a free flow from the brain to the diaphragm. Less than A students, they slouch and they're miserable. They fall asleep. There's drool on the desk. I don't think they're getting enough sleep. I think you get the gist of the A student. So I want to conclude. I want to say that grading is clearly an imperfect system. Uh, I don't. I'll do my best to just make sure that the grading is a measure of the student learning outcomes. You got to be able to generate an argumentative essay. You got to be able to deal with opposing views. You got to be able to use signal phrases and in-text MLA citations. You got to be able to write sentences. You got to be able to write simple, compound, and complex sentences. You got to be able to punctuate. You got to avoid comma splices and run-ons and sentence fragments and pronoun agreement errors. You got to be able to spell. I'm sorry, these are just called standards, and I refuse to commit the patronizing, condescending discrimination of low expectations. So anyways, it's a great topic. I look forward to hearing your comments on this, and until next time, I am out.